The moment before everything changed was quiet. Daniel Harper stood in the airport security line, jacket over his arm, phone in his hand. Feeling a strange weight he could not explain. People rushed around him, rolling bags, checking watches, moving forward with purpose. He was doing the same, yet something inside him felt slow and unsure, like part of him was being left behind. This business trip was supposed to be simple. Chicago to Seattle, 4 days of meetings. One presentation. A return flight on Friday night. Daniel had done this dozens of times before. He knew the routine well enough to follow it without thinking. Still, that morning felt different, though he could not say why. At home, just an hour earlier, Laura had stood by the front door with her arms folded. She wore a soft sweater and the tired smile she had learned to keep ready. "Safe flight," she said. "You too?" Daniel replied without thinking, then corrected himself. "I mean, I'll text when I land." Laura nodded. They hugged, careful and light, like two people afraid of breaking something fragile. When Daniel walked away, neither of them looked back. Now, as Daniel moved through the airport, he wondered when that distance had started. There had been no single fight, no dramatic moment. Life had simply filled the space between them with work, habits, and silence. He told himself that was normal. That was what adulthood looked like. On the plane, Daniel took his seat by the window. He liked window seats. They gave him something to look at when his thoughts grew too loud. As passengers settled in, he pulled out his laptop, then closed it again. He wasn't ready to work yet. That was when he noticed her. She sat a few rows ahead across the aisle. She had dark blonde hair pulled back loosely and wore a gray coat folded neatly on her lap. She was reading, fully focused, unaware of anything else around her. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance, yet something about the calm way she held herself caught Daniel's attention. The plane began to taxi. She looked up briefly, as if sensing someone watching. Their eyes met for a second. She smiled, small, polite, and quick, then returned to her book. Daniel looked away. Feeling oddly embarrassed, he told himself it meant nothing. People smiled at strangers all the time. The flight passed quietly. Daniel stared out the window, watching the clouds stretch like endless white fields. He thought about Laura, about how little they talked lately, about how conversations felt more like updates than connection. He wondered if other couples felt the same way or if he had failed at something important. When the plane landed in Seattle, rain tapped against the windows. Daniel stood to retrieve his bag and noticed the woman from earlier waiting in the aisle. Up close, she looked a little tired, like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. They exited the plane within seconds of each other. At baggage claim, Daniel spotted her again, standing alone, scrolling through her phone. Their bags appeared almost at the same time. As they headed toward the exit, the rain grew heavier. People hurried outside, pulling coats tight. "Seattle weather," the woman said suddenly, stopping beside him. Daniel turned, surprised. "I guess the rain comes free with the ticket." She laughed softly. "I'm Emily." Daniel. They stood there for a moment, unsure what to say next. Then the hotel shuttle arrived, saving them from the pause. They sat across from each other during the ride. The city blurred past the windows, gray and green. Daniel noticed Emily looking out quietly, her reflection faint in the glass. At the hotel, Daniel checked in and waited for the elevator. When the doors opened, Emily stepped in behind him. "Same floor," she said, glancing at the panel. "Looks like it." The elevator ride was short and silent. When they reached the floor, Emily nodded once and walked down the hall. Daniel watched her go before reminding himself to focus. That evening, Daniel attended a welcome dinner with colleagues. The restaurant was loud, full of conversation and forced laughter. He played his part well, discussing numbers and plans, smiling when needed. Still, his thoughts drifted. After dinner, he returned to the hotel instead of going out with the group. He changed clothes and headed to the lounge, hoping a quiet drink might help him unwind. The lounge was dim and warm. A few people sat scattered around, talking in low voices. Daniel took a seat near the bar. "It's just water," he told the bartender. As he turned, he saw Emily again. She sat at the other end of the bar, holding a mug with both hands. "Tea," he guessed. She looked up surprised, then smiled. "Looks like we keep running into each other." "Either that or the hotel is very small," Daniel said. She shifted on her stool. "Mind if I sit closer? It's loud over there?" "Sure." They talked easily, as if continuing a conversation already started. Emily explained she was from Toronto, in Seattle, for a short consulting project. Daniel shared just enough about his work without getting lost in details. Minutes turned into an hour. The noise around them faded. Emily spoke about travel, about how hotels all started to feel the same after a while. Daniel agreed. He told her he sometimes forgot what city he was in when he woke up. "Does it ever make you feel disconnected?" Emily asked. Daniel paused. "More than I like to admit." She nodded, as if that answer made sense. Emily didn't share much at first, but little pieces came out. She had been married once. It had ended quietly, without anger, but not without pain. She spoke carefully, choosing her words, not asking for sympathy. Daniel listened. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened, and that felt rare. When they finally stood to leave, the lounge was nearly empty. "Well," Emily said, slipping on her coat, "I should get some sleep." "Yeah, big day tomorrow." They walked to the elevators together. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Emily." Back in his room, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. He checked his phone. No messages from Laura. He told himself she was probably busy. Still, the silence felt heavy. The next morning, Daniel saw Emily at breakfast. They shared a quick wave, nothing more. Work pulled him away, and the day moved fast. Between meetings, Daniel found his mind drifting again. He replayed conversations with Emily, the simple way she spoke, the way she seemed present in every moment. It wasn't attraction in a clear sense. It was something quieter, a feeling of recognition. That afternoon, as rain eased into a light mist, Daniel stepped outside for air. He walked without direction, hands in his pockets. Getting lost too. Emily stood a few steps away, holding a coffee. "Seems like it," Daniel said. They walked together, not far, just around the block. They talked about small things, favorite cities, foods they missed from home. Emily mentioned she loved the way Seattle felt thoughtful, like a city that didn't rush. Daniel realized he hadn't felt rushed in her presence either. When they returned to the hotel, Daniel checked his watch. "I should prep for tomorrow." "Me too." They paused near the entrance. "See you around?" Emily said. "Yeah, see you." That night, Daniel lay awake longer than usual. He thought about Laura, about how conversations with her had become careful and limited. He thought about Emily and how natural everything felt. He told himself this was just travel, just two strangers talking, nothing more. Yet deep down, he knew something had shifted. The business trip was no longer just about work. And Daniel was standing at the edge of a feeling he did not yet understand. One that would soon ask him questions he had been avoiding for years. The days passed quickly in Seattle, and Daniel found himself noticing Emily more than he had planned. They kept running into each other in the hotel lobby, at breakfast, and even in the elevators. Each meeting was brief, casual, polite, but Daniel began feeling a pull he couldn't name. It wasn't romance exactly, not yet, but it was something powerful, a connection he hadn't realized he was missing. It was strange to feel seen, truly seen, by someone he barely knew. During one lunch break, Daniel ended up sitting at the hotel cafe with Emily. They talked about work, travel, and life in a way Daniel hadn't experienced in years. Emily spoke about her recent divorce honestly, but without bitterness, sharing the quiet loneliness that sometimes followed big life changes. Daniel found himself opening up about his own life. At the distance with Laura, the emptiness that came from routine and the longing he could no longer ignore. Emily listened without judgment, nodding in understanding. Her presence was soothing, yet it stirred something Daniel had buried for a long time. The hope that life could still surprise him. That afternoon, after a long series of meetings, Daniel decided to take a walk outside. The rain had stopped, leaving streets shiny and reflective, almost dreamlike. He was surprised to find Emily outside, walking slowly along the same path. They exchanged smiles, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, unforced. Finally, Emily asked if he wanted to walk together. Daniel agreed. They wandered through quiet streets, talking about small, everyday things, favorite cafes, books they had read, cities they had loved. Daniel noticed how icily the conversation flowed, how natural it felt to laugh with her. Realized that this trip, which had started as nothing more than a business obligation, had become something entirely different. With Emily, the weight he had carried for so long felt lighter. By the third day, Daniel began noticing subtle moments of intimacy in their friendship. A lingering look, a shared joke, the quiet understanding that neither needed to explain every word. He remembered how distant he had felt from Laura and how strained their connection had become over the years. He felt a pang of guilt, but also clarity. Life was too short to ignore what made him feel alive. Emily had awakened a part of him he hadn't known was still there, a part that craved honesty, warmth, and connection. That evening, Daniel and Emily found themselves at the hotel fire pit, a small circle of warmth in the cool night air. They wrapped themselves in blankets borrowed from the hotel and spoke softly. Emily asked about regrets, about choices she sometimes wished she could change. Daniel answered honestly, telling her how he had stayed in his marriage longer than he should have, how he had let comfort and routine replace connection. Emily listened, her eyes reflecting empathy without pity. They stayed there late, speaking of fears, hopes, and quiet disappointments. Daniel realized he had never shared so much with anyone outside of work or family. Emily admitted she had been hesitant to trust again after her divorce, but that moments like this reminded her it was possible. The conversation was intimate in a way that did not cross boundaries. It was honesty, vulnerability, and understanding all the things Daniel had been missing. The next day was the last full day of the trip. Daniel felt the weight of impending departure, but also a strange anticipation. He noticed Emily at breakfast, sitting alone, reading a book. Their eyes met, and she smiled. He realized he didn't want this connection to end, yet he also knew it could not continue if he was unwilling to face the truth at home. Later, during a break, Daniel stepped outside for a moment. Emily joined him. "Tomorrow's the last day," she said softly. Daniel nodded. They walked together in silence, letting the quiet settle around them. He wanted to tell her how much she had meant, how much this week had changed him, but words felt inadequate. Emily spoke first, her voice gentle but firm. "Whatever you choose, next make sure it's honest." Daniel knew exactly what she meant. He returned to the hotel feeling a mixture of fear and clarity. That night, he called Laura. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. They spoke openly about their feelings, about the distance that had grown between them, and the quiet heartbreak of realizing they had grown apart. There was no anger, no blame, just honesty. By the end of the call, they agreed to separate, not out of spite, but because it was the right step for both of them. The final morning of the trip arrived. Daniel packed slowly, savoring the final hours. Emily appeared in the lobby, suitcase in hand. They smiled, acknowledging the week that had changed both of them. Words felt unnecessary. She extended her hand briefly, a gesture that was both goodbye and promise. Daniel realized he had never felt such a combination of sorrow and hope. On the flight home, Daniel stared out the window, watching the clouds. They no longer felt endless. They seemed like a threshold, a sign of transition. He thought about Emily and the honesty she had inspired in him, about the courage he had found to face his own life. Months later, Daniel arrived in Toronto, nervous and hopeful. Emily waited in a quiet cafe, smiling softly as he entered. There were no grand declarations, no promises. Just two people acknowledging that life could begin again, carefully, patiently, and openly. They spent the afternoon talking, learning about each other anew. Aware that the connection they had discovered was worth nurturing, Daniel realized that this business trip had been far more than work. It had been a turning point, a week that asked everything of his heart and gave him the courage to face his truth. It was not about romance alone, nor about running from the past. It was about the power of connection, honesty, and the willingness to embrace life's unexpected changes. In the quiet moments of the cafe, with Emily across from him, Daniel understood something simple yet profound. Sometimes life's most meaningful journeys come when we least expect them, asking us to be brave, to be honest, and to open our hearts again. And in that realization, he felt the first true sense of hope he had experienced in years. This week in Seattle had changed him. It had taught him that life was not about avoiding discomfort, but about facing it, not about hiding from feelings, but understanding them, and not about clinging to what was safe, but embracing what could be real. Emily had shown him what it meant to be truly seen, and Daniel knew he would never forget it. As the day ended, Daniel walked through the streets of Toronto with Emily by his side. They didn't need to speak constantly. The quiet between them was comfortable, full of trust and anticipation. For the first time in years, Daniel felt ready not just to continue, but to live fully. To open his heart without fear, to trust that unexpected changes could lead to something beautiful. In that quiet confidence, he finally understood life's most profound moments often arrive unannounced during ordinary days, in conversations that seem small at first. And when they do, we have to recognize them, accept them, and allow them to change us. Daniel had learned this lesson in Seattle, and now, walking beside Emily, he felt ready for whatever came next. The business trip had ended, but his life had begun anew. The week that had seemed routine at first had revealed truths about love, honesty, and courage. Daniel Harper was no longer just a man traveling for work. He was a man who had discovered that the heart's quiet call was the most important journey of all. And with Emily by his side, Daniel knew that unexpected moments, the kind that shift life completely, could lead to hope, joy, and the start of something meaningful if one was brave enough to embrace them.